Hi guys, let's solve today's Leetcode daily problem, which is the number of ways to paint n by 3 grid. Okay, you have a grid of size n by 3, and you want to paint each cell of the grid exactly one of the three colors. So you have n rows and only 3 columns, and you need to paint those cells with 3 colors, which are red, green, and yellow. But while painting that, you need to follow that no two adjacent cells has the same color, so they don't mix. Okay, no two cells that share either vertical or horizontal sides have the same color. And given the n be the number of rows, you need to return the number of ways to paint the grid. Okay, and answer, yeah, it can grow very large number, so you need to you must be computed modulo, right? Okay, so imagine we have n equals to 1, so only one row with 3 columns, like 3 cells in it. So either you start it at the first cell with the red or yellow or with green. So for each of those options, like choices, you have 4 other choices possible. Because of the first one is being red, you can either choose either yellow or green for the second cell. For the third cell, because they are yellow or green, you can choose red or green for yellow and red and yellow for green. So you start with red, right? So you have 4 options. Similarly, you'll have 8 other options when you start with yellow and green. In total, you have 12 options when you have row 3 or row with 3 cells of the row 1. Okay, but the problem is when you start with you can't multiply the number of rows with 12, because here you can see, right? If you start with like the 3 colors here. Okay, you imagine you took any of the 3 colors. So but here the vertical also doesn't match, right? So this should be not matching, so they should not be the same color. So from the next row onwards, you should be more careful. So for that, we need to figure out the pattern here, such that if you can find out, there are 2 patterns here in the example. That is, you are painting in the type 1, you are painting with only 2 colors, like 2 colors are repeating on 1 color. So you are completing the whole grid paint whole row with only 2 colors, like red, yellow, red, or yellow, red, yellow, or green, red, and green, like that. And in other type 2, you are using all 3 colors, like yellow, green, red, yellow, red, green, red, yellow, green, like that. You can see 6 kind of type 1 and 6 types of 6 ways of type 2, using all 3 and using only 2. So here I wrote that here. You can create 6 rows, 6 ways, using only 2 colors, like red, yellow, red, and I think so. It's similarly like first cell can be any of 3 options, and the other one would be 2 options, and the next will be same that. So 3 into 2 will be 6. Okay, and the last one being different is also being 6. 3 options, 6 options here. So you have type 1 of 6 ways and type 2 of 6 ways. So we can evaluate the next row, like the current row, using the previous row type. Okay, so we are going to evaluate the both cases of the from next rows after first row. Like you are on row 2 and you have type 1 on row 1. Okay, like let's take an example for better understanding, like the previous one being red, yellow, and red. So at the first cell, you can take either yellow or also green, because on top you have red, you have 2 options here, either you can take green or you can take yellow. So if you take yellow, the second cell, because top of the row is having yellow cell and you're having on to the left you have yellow, so that is matching. So it consider only one color, like they're the same color. So then you can have red or also green here, because on top also red and on left also yellow, and the top is also yellow, sorry. Then you can take the current cell as red or green, because they don't match with yellow. So if you take red here, the top is also red here, and also under the left is also red, so you can take green and also yellow, 2 options here. Okay, and then when if you take green, so you are having red on top and green onto the left, so you can take only yellow here. Okay, so if you take yellow at the start, you have 3 possibles here, 3 possible ways to paint the current row. Okay, but if you take green, then you can take only red, because on top you have yellow, onto the left you have green, so you have only one option, that is red. And you have red, you have taken red, on top you have red, and also onto the left you have red, so you can take two options here, that is green and yellow. So if you have type 1 on the previous row, like having only two colors, red, yellow, red, that is only two colors, that is type 1, then you can get five possible options here. In those you are getting white, yellow, red, green, that is all three colors, so that is type 2. And here yellow, red and yellow, so type 1. And yellow, green, yellow, type 1. And green, red, green, that is also type 1. Okay, only two colors, so here green, red and yellow, that is type 2. So if you have type 1 in previous, you are having three type 1s and two type 2s that are we can create in the current row if the previous row is of type 1. Okay, similarly if you calculate for type 2 by taking an example of all three colors, red, yellow, green, because on top you have red, you can take yellow or green here. Okay, so if you take yellow, you have that is matching, like on top you have yellow and on to the left you have yellow, so you can take either green or also red here. Imagine you are taking green, so as the top is also green and on to the left is also green, you can take red here or also yellow here. Okay, and if you take red, so onto the left it is red, onto the top it is green, so you can take only yellow here. Similarly, if you start with green, so onto the left it is green and onto the top yellow, you have only red here possible here. And on the last cell, because green and red are already neighboring paints, you can only take yellow. Okay, so if you take type 2, there are only four possible ways to paint the current row if the previous row is type 2. So what are those types? Like taking red, yellow and green as previous row, which is type 2, having all colors, you can possibly get yellow, green, red, which is not having the same color of the neighbors, it is not matching. So you can take type 2 1 and yellow, green, yellow, which is type 1, and yellow, red, yellow, which is type 1, and you can also paint green, red, yellow, which is type 2. So for type 2 you are getting two type 1s and two type 2s. Okay, this information is going creating this information is the soul of this question. So if we have this question, it will be very easy to solve this. Okay, so if we have the n is 1, we can directly written 12, and from the next one we need to calculate how many ways that we can paint. So I'm taking the total as 0 now, and the mod value to complete to get the modulo values, and I'll explain the DP version later, but for now imagine you are only using recursion. Like you can increase the total, like you can get the like take only this here, like you can we are having n minus 1 rows to be calculated, so we are at the row 0 now, and we have total of n rows. You have n minus 1 rows. Imagining we are at row 1, we need to calculate all the rows. So the current row was 1. Okay, and the type is 1, like first type 1, imagining that the current row is of type 1. So we have 6 possible type 1 ways, right? Here any of them would will result the same number of possible ways to paint. So we don't need to calculate for each of them, we can just calculate for one and multiply that with 6 because of 6 ways. Similarly for type 2, we can calculate for 1 and we can multiply with 6. So we are just being cautious with the modulo, and we are returning value. So what I'm using to solve this, okay, n minus 1 is the end row that we need to looking for, that we are going to calculate for. So what my function does is like when the end row will be n minus 1 and the current row will be changing at each row, and the form is like type. Okay, so if you reach the end and the previous row, like the previous type was 1, we will return 5, because if the previous was type 1, you can have 5 ways to paint, right? So you will return 5. Similarly if it is type 2, okay, then you will return 4, because the 4 ways possible if the top or like the previous row is type 2. Okay, then if it is not the end, like you are in the middle of some row, starting from the first row you're iterating, like you're solving, right? If you're at the middle, if the type of the previous row is 1, you need to calculate for the current row will be 3 type 1s and 2 type 2s. Okay, because if the previous row is type 1, the current row possible is 3 type 1s and 2 type 2s. So we are asking, I'm type 1, I'm type 1, and so, give me the total number of ways for the next row, from the next row onwards. So DP solution. Okay, then you are asking that until you reach the end, you don't add any values, and when you are at the last row, you will return either 5 or 4 ways, and then you multiply them at each stage. So if you take the type 1 at the current stage possible way, you will have three of them, and you don't need to calculate for three of them. You just calculate for one of them and then multiply that with 3. Similarly with the type 2 as well. So also similarly, like if the type 2 was the previous row was of type 2, you will return 2 times of type 1 from the next row, and 2 times of type 2, because we calculated 2 type 1 and 2 type 2 here. Okay, so now that is the top down method. But when you ask for calculate the next row, it will be calculating for each and every row, like imagining tree. It will be having so many repeated sub problems, like you will be calculating the same calculation again and again and again. So instead of that, I will store the calculated value. Once if it is calculated, I'll store in the DP table that I'm going to create, and I'll store that and use that wisely when I need when I don't when I need to solve that again. Okay, I don't need to solve it again, and I'll just take that value in constant time. So for that, I'll take DP and I initiate with -1 value, and there are only 2 types, and there are n rows. Okay, then I'll pass the DP into the function. So here in function, what I'll do is, like, if that current situation, if that current row and the current type, like the type is 1 and 2, right? So I'm using them as 0 and 1 here for the indexing. If that is already calculated, then don't need to calculate again, just return that. So that to use that, we just need to store that values after calculation every time. So I'm storing that in the DP table and returning that as well, same, because if it is not calculated yet, you need to calculate and store that and return that. So that is the solution. So we can run this and see the result. Okay, it is accepting, and we just submit to see how it is doing in the time complexity.